Welcome to Tech Startup Stories, hosted by Natalie Binns. This is the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the B2B startup world.
Hi, I'm Natalie Binns, and after many years as a marketing leader in the B2B SaaS industry, I set up Hey Gabby to support startups and scale-ups with their go-to-market and growth needs. I work with so many great founders, and that's led me to want to hear their stories and share them with others. And that's why I set up this podcast. So let's get into this week's podcast. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's podcast. This week, not only are we going to have an explosion of amazingness, because we have Savannah Price, and she's the CEO and founder of Serene. Welcome to the show, Savannah.
Thank you, Natalie. It's lovely to be here.
I'm so glad that you're here, and we connected through one of our first guests for this season, Rachel from Initio, and so I'm so pleased that we have this great tight-knit community of female founders. And I wanted to ask you a little bit about, how you're connecting with other founders out there.
Yeah, for sure. I think when you're in the world of kind of tech and particularly around fintech, which is where we're positioned, it's a very small community. So you kind of tend to be going after the same clients, you tend to be going to the same events. And I think women founders gravitate towards each other naturally. So it's very much a kind of women supporting women. And I just think when it comes to founders and the whole founder experience, it's quite difficult to find people who can really understand and relate to exactly what you're going through. So I think there's a kind of an added gravitational pull to kind of finding and seeking each other out.
Yeah, and I think, it's great that you're getting to meet people in the same sort of industry as well, because I know that, being a female founder is one thing, being a female founder in a predominantly, everything is
Very male.
predominantly male-dominated industry these days. But yeah, it's great that you guys can connect and that you're meeting other people. So tell us a little bit about Serene. Tell us about what Serene's all about, what you guys do.
Yeah, so Serene is an AI platform, and we're all about helping financial institutions identify and support vulnerable customers. I think for us, it's always quite important when we're defining what a vulnerable customer is, because I think typically in fintech, the perception of vulnerability is somebody who's maybe not very financially resilient or has kind of from a low income group, but kind of our perspective on vulnerability is that it's more human than that. It's kind of any sort of life circumstances, experiences, health related things that could put someone at greater risk of harm. I guess kind of the backdrop to the company and where it started is I really never thought that I would end up in fintech. So Serene is really kind of comes a lot more from lived experiences that I have with siblings who struggle with mental health challenges. And one of our biggest issues was, how do we actually know when my siblings are struggling? Because, things are so subjective. People don't necessarily, or my siblings wouldn't necessarily tell us. And then it was always a big crisis point by the time we actually knew or could do anything about it. And I was looking for a more data-driven way of actually tracking that mental health journey. And the thing that worked best for us was to look at bank statement data. And what we saw in kind of the bank statement was, before there was a big crisis point, we could actually see quite erratic changes in how and where my siblings were spending money. Kind of fast forward a little bit, and that became our early warning system for actually identifying when my siblings started to struggle, but then also enabled us to actually connect with all the right support services, the right family members and loved ones to actually provide a bit more wraparound care and support during those times. And it kind of snowballed from there. So I felt that, mental health is such a fundamental part of the human condition, as is financial health in terms of going about your daily life. If there's a sort of vicious link or a cycle that kind of exists between the two, then it's not just for my family, it's not just for mental health. Like, we could actually use that insight to help a lot more people kind of in the context of financial resilience and well-being. So that's kind of backdrop to Serene. But yeah, it's definitely kind of evolved and pivoted and changed. And we're kind of now, this is where we are.
So with that, that's just such an incredible sort of story and what's driven you to do this. And I'm all about any organization that is building something to help people.
Yeah.
You're providing a platform that you're then selling into other banking organizations.
Yeah. So banks, lenders, utilities, telcos, kind of essential services or retail organizations would be our our client base.
So you only have to watch something like Despicable Me to kind of get the sense that bankers are the bad guys,
Yeah.
and seen as, people that don't care about people. So what's the uh, kind
The
of
benefit.
response that you've had from those
Yeah.
environments who, are critically seen as numbers people versus human people?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a bit twofold. I think we certainly learned along the way that doing good, or particularly around social good, doesn't get you, sadly, and I hate saying it, but it doesn't necessarily get you too far unless you can find the kind of commercial hook. So again, kind of part of the journey, I think there's a couple of things that really helped us get started, or at least, what I call our judo move in terms of opening the doors and then kind of figuring things out from there, was kind of around the time that I started the company. There was new regulation introduced in the UK, which actually relates specifically to vulnerable customers and how organizations actually have a responsibility not only to better serve those vulnerable customers, but they have to be able to identify the nature and scale of vulnerability, but also evidence to the regulators that they're doing kind of their best to support those customers, deliver the same types of outcomes to those customers as the general population. So I think the kind of that for us was the starting point. And as we've been, we're kind of this data analytics, behavioral analytics platform. And as we've been learning, we found very, very compelling commercial evidence why actually it's not about trying to identify the people you need to exclude from the system or kind of be, I don't know, quite, yeah, I guess exclusionary towards. It's actually much more around, we're typically finding around 40 to 60% of firms' customer base having one or more characteristic of vulnerability. So we're not just serving like a small portion of the population, we're actually serving the mass market. And we found that because we help firms understand human experience so much better, they can provide better services, they can actually include customers or bring them into the system when they typically be excluded by, say, a credit score or your affordability assessment. So we're kind of a revenue growth tool, and that's how we kind of played out and where we started. But then equally, because we can flag things up preemptively, we minimize losses downstream by being able to intervene before things have gotten worse, before customers, fall kind of delinquent, get into problem debt, or prey to scams, or just kind of churn and stop engaging with their financial service providers. So I think for us, the kind of the value levers that we're pulling, there's obviously a big social impact and customer outcome lens, but then equally we're, a growth tool, we're a kind of efficiency engine, and we're also kind of the regulatory tick box. So it's kind of like the perfect mix of things. And once we manage to start telling that story, I think it's been incredibly powerful, because not only are we speaking to the numbers, but also we're speaking to the human behind that number. We're selling to people, and even if we're selling to enterprise, at the end of the day, it's the relationship that you have with the human on the other side of that transaction that matters. And it's been amazing as well for me. I think it was quite a big thing as someone who's quite private about her personal life and all of that, to start talking about my family experiences, start talking and sharing kind of my siblings' journey and that vulnerability, kind of the word vulnerability. But I think the minute that I started doing that, I've been really amazed at how many people start telling me things on the other side of the table. And I haven't met anybody who hasn't got their own personal experience, be it for themselves or be it for somebody in their kind of close circle, that hasn't experienced something to do with vulnerability and the negative impact it has, particularly on their finances. So yeah, it's not easy. And we definitely still come up against a lot of pushback or a lot of skepticism, but we're kind of slowly cracking through. And the more proof points we have, the more evidence that we're building now, is making it a lot easier. And I think shifting that perspective a little bit from the cold, hard numbers people into the, wow, we actually can have some compassion and still make money. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's interesting. I've spoken to a number of ladies on the podcast for this season where the driver has been some kind of social
Yeah.
issue. It's been something that they've experienced themselves. It's been some emotion, or event that has driven them to try and solve a problem.
Yeah.
And so it's great to see this great, wave of female founders bringing in these social,
Mm.
stories to building their startups. And I think it's just a very different way of approaching B2B tech. So going back to before Serene, you obviously had that. You've been a founder before, haven't you?
I would say I've been a founder before. I wouldn't say a particularly successful one in tech. I think it was more, figuring out what you what you wanted to do, what was interesting, kind of exploring the market and flexing a few muscles in that sense. So, um, actually, kind of my background has always been quite entrepreneurial. I guess the kind of the founder definition these days is maybe a little bit different to an entrepreneur definition when you're kind of speaking to people and what they can relate it with. But my background is actually in climate science and geochemistry. So,
Oh, wow.
yeah, I always thought if it wasn't going to be health tech, I thought it would be green tech or clean tech, but actually it's fintech. And so that was kind of my backdrop. So always also quite kind of academic, quite numbers driven and scientific, and then kind of took a little break from that to be a show jumper. So I was a
Oh,
professional athlete
wow.
for 6 years. And
Goodness.
started a couple of businesses, buying and selling young horses and kind of producing them for sort of like the top level of competition. So that was, yeah, that was interesting. And kind of the segue into this world was actually during COVID when all competition stopped, most sales stopped. It was such a kind of uncertain time, and I all of a sudden had this free space, or like free time, and I was like, okay, I know that I want to make an impact. I don't feel like, as much as I love the equestrian, as much as I love kind of science and academia, I actually just want to do something that I can tangibly feel is making a difference and at a big scale. So did my MBA during COVID, which was a lot of fun. Kind of learned a few of the basics, which, I've always done things quite intuitively, but I always felt like my gap was that I've never worked for a big corporate, don't really have the fundamentals, and kind of got that sort of grounding during COVID. And when the lockdown lifted, it was like full streets, I don't know, yeah, I guess full steam ahead, starting with kind of more of a mental health related company and then pivoting into what Serene is now.
So, what would you say have been the biggest surprises in the journey with Serene so far?
I think kind of I never really anticipated it. When you start something, you obviously have big hopes and dreams, but I never really anticipated the kind of the types of customers we'd be selling into, or the types of people and the kind of the levels that I'd be selling at. I think the biggest shock and surprise is everybody tells you when you start a company how difficult it is. And you're like, yeah, I know it's going to be hard, but nothing prepares you for just how hard. I don't know, and how relentless. And I say it with a smile because I can't imagine doing anything else now, but it is possibly the most challenging, grueling, brutal experience I've ever been through. But at the same time, it's the most rewarding and exciting. But there's nothing kind of mid-level. Everything is in extremes. And I think it's that kind of the flipping between extremes. 1 week you're on top of the world. You're like, this is the most incredible thing. We're going to the moon. And the next week you're like crawling on the floor, being like, I don't think this is going to work. How am I going to make payroll? How am I going to, I don't think I've got the energy to do this anymore. And then somehow you find that reserve and you pull it out. And I think that's probably just, yeah, that kind of the extremities of emotion was something I thought I was mentally prepared for and wasn't. But I think how quickly you can learn and how quickly things change and how fast it is actually how you can operate. I think that was the other surprise is, yeah, I mean, it's endless surprises. I have no idea what tomorrow is going to bring. And I think it's quite exciting when there's just a lot of kind of known unknowns or unknown unknowns. And yeah, I mean, every day is a surprise, and I love that. So I think I can't really define or put a pin on what would be the most surprising of it all. But yeah,
So, just a complete roller coaster.
a complete roller coaster. Yeah, it's exciting, but it is definitely. I think having a plan and having a strategy is incredibly important, but then also being able to be very open to change. And I think for me, it's sort of there's so many opportunities, there's so many good ideas. I think having a plan really helps when you can start, trying to understand or map a path forward. But at the end of the day, I think it still becomes like a gut feel, like you're kind of receiving so much information from so many different sources on a daily basis. It's quite difficult to kind of put those all in place. So at some point, you just sort of trust your gut and hope that you're retaining all these little small data points that help you make a better decision. But yeah, sort of part strategy and part just winging it, I guess. It's what it is.
I love that. And are you still managing to get any time doing what you love and horse riding?
No, so I haven't actually ridden a horse in 2 years, which is really sad. And I do miss it a lot, but I've sort of replaced that sport side of things with kind of running and cycling. And I'm doing a triathlon in a couple of months, which will be my first triathlon. And yeah, I think for me, that's sort of also on the mental health side of things. It's really important for there to be something that's outside of what I'm doing with Serene. But I think best as well when I'm moving. So kind of trying to stay healthy, kind of get my competitive fix, which I get a lot of with Serene, but also kind of something that's just for me.
And obviously, like most people, when you're in the thick of the business all day, every day, evenings, weekends, getting that time away from your
Yeah.
laptop to clearly think about things often brings new ideas and clarity that you don't necessarily have when you're kind of burning
Yeah.
the midnight oil. So I can see how that really, really helps you in building the company.
Yeah, no, it definitely does. I think you definitely go through periods, and I notice it in myself, and I also notice it in my team. We have some very, very intense periods where you're kind of, yeah, firing on all cylinders. You don't get a time to rest. You're not sleeping so much. You're doing a lot of kind of very late nights, early mornings, kind of intense weekends. And then it's interesting because the best work, I mean, it's not interesting. I think it's a known fact, but I always think it's important, and I say it to my team as well, is like if we've been doing a particularly intense period, just take some time, take a breather, make sure that you're kind of getting out, because when you're in the thick of things, you're operating quite reactively and tactically, and sometimes you need to step away so you can actually bring that more kind of the top-down view, the sort of distanced view, and having that perspective, I think, is really important for everyone, not just for, I guess, myself and my co-founder and that. So, yeah.
So tell me a bit about your co-founder journey.
Hmm. Yes, my co-founder journey. So I have kind of been through kind of same as Serene, I think a couple of ups and downs. I've had kind of a co-founder breakup, which was quite difficult. And I think one of the things I think when it comes to co-founding a relationship is not necessarily moving too fast. I think not one person is going to have all the skills that you need to build a business. And it is kind of a lot like a marriage. So my previous co-founder was, really talented, really brilliant. And I think we just sort of diverged in terms of the direction we wanted to take the company in, or what was speaking to us and what we found purposeful and meaningful. But my current co-founder, Ehsan, who is also our chief data scientist, is brilliant. So I think from a kind of temperamental or temperament match, as well as kind of a diversified skill set, I remember when I met him, he basically said to me, at some point, data science is no longer science, it becomes art. And so, we're creating art at this point, trying to do kind of something new in the industry. But yeah, I think, if I think about my co-founder journey and lessons learned, is not rushing into kind of getting into that co-founding relationship. I think spending time working with each other, really understanding what your shared objectives are, if you're aligned in terms of how far you want to take a company, how you want to operate a company, what are your fundamental and primary values, but then equally, I guess, what is your conflict style, or how do you manage a bit of conflict, because inevitably you're not going to agree on everything. Sounds a little bit like dating, I guess, as well. I'm trying to figure things out, but you get some things wrong, you get some things right, and you learn as you go. But yeah, I think, SM for me is brilliant, and his background is very, where I have I guess quite a unique and not seemingly kind of related background to enterprise tech and fintech. He's kind of firmly from that world. Like, he started his career at the PRA Group, which is a big debt purchasing company, and then kind of moved on to being kind of a data scientist at Salary Finance, and he built the world's first attrition-based credit score. So that was then sold to Experian, and kind of, I guess, alternative ways of thinking about risk and measuring risk and kind of understanding people and their behaviors. And he's kind of brought that across to Serene, but we're looking at it from a very different lens. So yeah.
I love that. And how are you guys funded? Are you bootstrapped? Did you go with angel investors and sort of VCs?
Yeah, so I mean, we bootstrapped for quite a while, and then we are now kind of funded. We're kind of VC funded, and we also have NatWest as a strategic investor, so kind of client and investor relationship there. So, but we're relatively early stage. We're kind of a seed stage company, and yeah, trying not to do too much fundraising, but we are kind of in the process of planning a our next round and our next raise now, because things have been going very well and we're hitting a lot of good milestones and kind of need a little bit of, I guess, rocket fuel to keep the rocket ship going forward.
How have you found the fundraising process so far?
Yeah, I think it's not, again, it's not the easiest, but I think there's obviously a lot of talk around how, there's a big funding gap for female founders, particularly female founders in fintech. And it's interesting, and I've kind of spoke about this quite a bit as well, as I didn't feel like I had any different experience to my male counterparts in terms of kind of how challenging it is, or the environment to raise. I think if you're building a really good business and you're able to tell a proper story, I don't think gender should come into play. But I think if I look at it from the investor side, when we did our last round, I was very clear that I wanted really big female investor representation kind of on the cap table. And so actively was targeting female angel groups, female VCs. And I think I've ended up with 2 women on the cap table and about 18 men. So it didn't work as well as I'd hoped, which I found a little bit disappointing, but I think it speaks a little bit to the environment that we're in. But yeah, I mean, I think we closed around in like less than 4 months last year, which is, super, super fast when it comes to a funding round. And I'm hoping we'll kind of see a similar thing this year, but definitely wanting to be coming at it from a position of strength rather than a position of kind of desperation, because again, I think the more you need money, the more people want to run in the opposite direction. So, which is the funny thing with raising, I guess. Yeah.
And how have you found growing the team? I know you're a small team so far, but how have you found that process?
We've been quite lucky, I think, in terms of, at least for this. I mean, the process for me is, the one thing I knew is I wanted to, or our initial hires, I prioritized hiring quite a senior team with quite a lot of experience, but kind of obviously the prerequisite being it's still quite hands-on. So when we were looking at growing the team, it was really looking for people who were super strong in certain verticals, but also have the kind of the generalist skill set where they're quite comfortable to jump kind of from position to position or wear multiple hats and just be quite versatile. A lot of, I mean, we're a team of 6 at the moment and we are kind of growing, but I think the core team was through invest introductions. I met Esan, my co-founder, through one of our angel investors. And then we've had a lot of people approaching us. So, very often when we're working with firms or we're talking about the product, the people that we're working with on the other side of the table, we're getting kind of a lot of requests to come and join the team, which is nice. So I think, we're attracting the right people. But yeah, I think kind of moving forward, we do want to have a slightly more structured kind of process for hiring. And also what's very important for us is inclusive hiring, or making sure that the right people are seeing and have access to kind of putting applications in. And then ultimately it being more of a meritocracy therefore, but making sure that when we're publicizing roles, they're in the right places, so that we get a good diverse pool of people that we can look at. But core team is very much still network and inbound, I guess.
I think that's often the case when you're sort of at the early stages.
Yeah.
I think obviously when, like you say, it comes down to trust. When you're so small, you need to know that everybody is taking accountability for their function and giving their all, so that you're not having to kind of watch over what's happening.
No, exactly it. And I think the autonomy is really important. So yeah, trust and autonomy, I think, is kind of really key values for us. And just being supportive of each other and kind of understanding. I think oftentimes somebody will be a little bit kind of underwater, I guess, in terms of workload. And, for us all, we will always step in and support where it needed to support. And very much for me as well, being able to actually delegate. Yeah, I think for us, it's a very cohesive team. And we have frequent catch-ups and check-ins. Everyone sort of knows what's going on, and everyone has their kind of key accountabilities to make sure it runs as smoothly as possible. And the truth is, it doesn't really run so smoothly all the time. So,
So what advice would you give to other founders that are starting out on their journey, or perhaps people that haven't taken the leap as yet?
I guess for me, it's just, if you find advice, I guess actually it comes back a little bit to what you're saying when you made the comment around purpose. And kind of, it's quite interesting, or at least what you're saying and seeing is quite interesting, around a lot more female founders potentially kind of looking at social impact and more impact oriented fields. And I think for me, the purpose is actually becomes the driver. So find a purpose. It doesn't need to be like an impact related purpose. It's just like really understanding what motivates you and what drives you and what will get you up out of bed in the morning, able to push in long hours and do all of that stuff because you actually have an engine that fires within you rather than it being kind of something that's externally motivated. And I guess the other advice is just be passionate or kind of be authentic. I think there's a trendiness related to being a founder or a co-founder. And I think it kind of sometimes paints a little bit of a skewed picture of what the reality is. And I think what makes it easier is if you are true to yourself, not trying to be anybody who you aren't, not trying to kind of align to other people's values or motivators or drivers, but actually very clear on the path that you want to track for yourself. I think that is really helpful. And also authenticity attracts kind of the right sort of people or the right businesses as well. So I think those are a couple of things, but I would definitely say take the leap. Like if you feel, I think for me, it wasn't really a choice. It was more of a compulsion to do it. So I think if you have a compulsion to do something, just do it and be brave. I think for me, there's been a couple of failures. There's been a fair amount of kind of picking yourself up off the floor and kind of carrying on. And every time that you kind of something doesn't work, it's a key learning. And this is also what I say with the team and when we're moving forward. It's I'd rather fail quickly because then you have an answer. That's a learning. That's a data point that you can take forward. And if you can make mistakes and learn from those mistakes, you're just going to build something better. So just be a little bit fearless and to go for it and figure out where the compulsion comes from.
Savannah, what a great way to end the podcast. Thank you so much for your time. I'm so excited to watch Serene grow and see you achieve your goals of really helping people. I would love to hear how you're doing in about a year's time. We'll get you back on the podcast to see how you're going. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks for being on the show.
Well, thanks, Natalie. It was great. Great chatting.
That's it for this episode of Tech Startup Stories. Have a story you'd like us to share or a topic you'd want to cover? Reach out and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.